Mom, Derek isn't who you think he is. We've been watching him for weeks, and there's something really wrong. My 16-year-old daughter Emma whispered as she cornered me in the laundry room, her younger brother Jake nodding solemnly behind her. Their words hit me like a punch to the stomach, because I thought I'd finally found happiness again after 3 years of being a single mother. But what my children discovered about Derek's true intentions would shake me to my core in ways I never imagined possible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah Chen, and at 38, I thought I'd learned enough about life to spot trouble when it walked through my door. After my divorce from Marcus became final 3 years ago, I'd thrown myself completely into raising Emma and Jake while building my small but successful interior design business from our home in Riverside. The kids and I had created our own little world, complete with Friday movie nights, weekend hiking trips, and the kind of easy rhythm that comes when you finally stop walking on eggshells around someone who never appreciated what they had. I met Derek Castellano at a coffee shop on 4th Street on a rainy Tuesday morning in March. I was there early, reviewing fabric samples for a client's living room renovation, when this tall man with salt and pepper hair and the most genuine smile I'd seen in years asked if he could share my table since the place was packed. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit that screamed success, and when he introduced himself as a commercial real estate developer, I couldn't help but be impressed by his confident handshake and the way he actually listened when I mentioned my design work. Derek had this way of making you feel like the most interesting person in the room. During that first conversation, he asked thoughtful questions about color theory and space planning, remembering details I mentioned about challenging clients and tight deadlines. When I had to leave for a consultation, he handed me his business card with elegant lettering that read Castellano Development Group and asked if I'd consider having dinner with him that weekend. The butterflies in my stomach felt like teenagers again, something I hadn't experienced since college. Our first official date was at Luminaire, the kind of upscale restaurant I'd driven past countless times but never imagined actually dining in. Derek arrived 10 minutes early with a single white orchid, explaining that he'd noticed I had several in my portfolio photos and thought roses were too predictable for someone with my artistic sensibilities. He opened every door, pulled out my chair, and when the waiter brought the wine list, he asked for my preferences instead of ordering for both of us like Marcus used to do. The conversation flowed effortlessly through 3 courses. Derek shared stories about transforming abandoned warehouses into luxury condominiums, his passion evident in the way his eyes lit up when describing architectural challenges and neighborhood revitalization projects. He asked about my design philosophy, my favorite periods of furniture, and how I'd built my client base from nothing. When I mentioned that Emma was applying for early admission to art programs and Jake was obsessed with marine biology, Derek's interest seemed genuine rather than polite. Derek paid the check without ceremony and walked me to my car, where he asked for a second date before kissing my hand like something out of an old movie. Driving home, I felt lighter than I had in years, almost guilty for how happy one evening had made me. Emma and Jake were already asleep, but I found myself humming while I got ready for bed, catching my reflection in the bathroom mirror and noticing that I was actually smiling. Our relationship developed steadily over the following months. Derek would send flowers to my office with handwritten notes that referenced inside jokes from our conversations. He took genuine interest in my work, often calling during lunch to hear about difficult clients or successful installations. When I mentioned struggling with the business side of design work, he offered to introduce me to his accountant and lawyer, saying that creative people deserved better financial support systems. The kids met Derek after we'd been dating for 6 weeks. I'd been nervous about introducing anyone into our carefully balanced family dynamic, but Derek won them over immediately. He brought Jake a coffee table book about deep-sea exploration and spent an hour looking through it with him, asking intelligent questions about bioluminescent creatures and ocean trenches. For Emma, he'd noticed her sketches on my refrigerator and brought her a professional-grade drawing tablet, explaining that he believed in investing in young talent. Derek began spending more time at our house, arriving for dinner with wine and stories about his day. He complimented my cooking, helped with dishes without being asked, and never tried to discipline the kids or overstep his boundaries as their mother's boyfriend. When Jake's soccer team made it to regional championships, Derek rearranged his schedule to attend the game, cheering louder than any of the actual parents. Emma started showing him her artwork, beaming when he offered thoughtful critiques and encouragement. 6 months into our relationship, Derek suggested we take a long weekend trip to Napa Valley. He'd booked separate rooms without me having to ask, planned visits to 3 wineries he thought would inspire my color palette work, and even researched family-friendly activities for when we brought the kids on future trips. Standing on the balcony of our bed and breakfast, watching the sunset paint the vineyard hills in shades of amber and gold, I allowed myself to imagine a future where loneliness wasn't my constant companion. Derek's integration into our lives felt natural and unforced. He started keeping a change of clothes in my bedroom closet and contributed to grocery bills without making a big production about it. When my ancient Honda needed major repairs, he offered to let me borrow his second car, a pristine BMW that made client meetings feel more professional. He never pressured me about commitment timelines or moving in together, seeming content to let our relationship develop at whatever pace felt comfortable for all of us. The first tiny crack in my contentment appeared during a family barbecue at my sister Michelle's house in July. Derek had been charming as usual, complimenting Michelle's garden and asking my brother-in-law about his woodworking hobby. But when Michelle pulled me aside to help in the kitchen, she mentioned that Derek's stories about his business seemed vague when pressed for specifics. She'd asked him about a recent project he'd mentioned, and his description of the timeline and location didn't quite match what he'd told me the week before. I brushed off Michelle's concerns, telling myself that she was being overprotective after watching me go through such a difficult divorce. Derek dealt with multiple projects simultaneously, and it made sense that details might occasionally blur together when he was talking casually at social gatherings. Besides, I'd seen his business cards, his expensive clothes, his luxury car. Everything about Derek Castellano screamed success and stability, exactly what I thought Emma, Jake, and I needed in our lives. August brought the beginning of small changes that felt positive at the time. Derek suggested that I raise my rates for design consultations, arguing that I was undervaluing my expertise and artistic vision. He helped me create a more professional website with better photographs of my completed projects. When potential clients called, Derek sometimes answered my phone if I was busy with the kids, professionally taking messages and scheduling appointments with the kind of polish that impressed people before they even met me. Derek also began offering financial advice that seemed sensible and caring. He pointed out that my savings account was earning practically nothing in interest and suggested moving some money into a higher-yield investment account he'd researched. When I hesitated, he explained the mathematics so clearly that keeping money in traditional savings seemed almost irresponsible. He offered to introduce me to his financial advisor, a woman named Patricia, who specialized in helping small business owners maximize their earning potential. The meeting with Patricia took place at Derek's suggestion in early September. She worked from an impressive office downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows and abstract art that Derek had helped her select. Patricia reviewed my financial situation with professional thoroughness, asking about my monthly expenses, client payment schedules, and long-term goals for Emma and Jake's educations. Her recommendations seemed logical: consolidate some accounts, move funds into better investment vehicles, and establish clearer boundaries between personal and business finances. Derek sat through the entire consultation, occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated his understanding of financial planning. Patricia seemed to defer to his judgment on several points, mentioning that he'd helped other clients navigate similar transitions from traditional savings to more sophisticated investment strategies. When she suggested that Derek could serve as a secondary contact on some accounts to help manage paperwork while I focused on creative work, it seemed like a practical arrangement between people who cared about my success. September also brought Emma's senior year college application stress and Jake's increasing involvement in marine biology competitions. Derek stepped up beautifully during this hectic period, driving Jake to weekend academic meets when I had client deadlines and spending hours with Emma helping her craft personal statements for art school applications. He never tried to replace their father, but he provided the kind of steady, masculine presence that Marcus had never offered, even when we were married. Derek's support during the college application process felt invaluable. He helped Emma organize her portfolio, suggesting layouts and presentation techniques from his experience with architectural proposals.
When she expressed anxiety about interview processes, Derek arranged practice sessions, teaching her to project confidence and articulate her artistic vision clearly. For Jake, Derek found connections to marine research programs and summer internship opportunities that could strengthen his eventual college applications. The subtle shift in our household dynamic happened so gradually that I barely noticed it initially. Derek's suggestions about scheduling, budgeting, and family organization came across as helpful rather than controlling. When he recommended switching to a shared calendar system so he could better coordinate his schedule with our family activities, it seemed thoughtful and efficient. His input on everything from grocery shopping to vacation planning felt like partnership rather than manipulation. October brought the first incident that should have raised serious red flags. Derek had been managing some of my investment account transfers, handling the paperwork since Patricia's office required extensive documentation that I found overwhelming while juggling client projects. When I wanted to withdraw money for Emma's college application fees, Derek seemed hesitant, explaining that the funds were temporarily tied up in a time-sensitive investment opportunity that would pay much higher returns if we didn't disturb it for another few weeks. The delay felt frustrating, but Derek's explanation about market timing and investment windows sounded sophisticated and caring. He offered to cover Emma's application fees personally, rather than interrupt what he described as a crucial growth period for my money. His willingness to spend his own funds seemed like generosity rather than control, and I felt grateful to have someone who understood financial complexities that honestly confused and intimidated me. Derek's integration into our family continued deepening throughout the fall. He attended Emma's art shows and Jake's academic competitions with the pride of an actual stepfather. When other parents asked about our relationship status, Derek would smile and say he felt lucky to be part of such an extraordinary family. His genuine affection for the kids seemed obvious, and their growing attachment to him made me hopeful about our future together. November brought Derek's suggestion that we start planning a Christmas vacation together, possibly a ski trip to Colorado, that would create the kind of family memories Emma and Jake deserved. He researched resorts, compared prices, and even found special programs for Jake's interest in high-altitude ecosystems. When I worried about the expense, Derek assured me that my investments were performing well enough to cover such luxuries without financial stress.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
The planning process for our vacation felt like a glimpse into the kind of family life I'd always wanted. Derek included Emma and Jake in destination research, asking for their preferences and making sure everyone felt excited about the plans. He handled booking logistics with the efficiency of someone accustomed to organizing complex travel arrangements. When I tried to access my investment accounts to check our available funds, Derek explained that Patricia's office was updating their systems and account access would be restored after the holidays. December arrived with the kind of holiday magic I hadn't experienced since before my divorce. Derek helped decorate our house with professional-level attention to detail, combining Emma's artistic vision with Jake's enthusiasm for elaborate light displays. He bought thoughtful gifts for the kids, things that showed he'd been paying attention to their individual interests and personalities. For me, he selected a stunning necklace from a local jewelry designer, explaining that he'd commissioned it specifically to complement my eyes and skin tone. Our Christmas Eve dinner felt like something from a magazine spread. Derek had arranged for catering from my favorite restaurant, allowing me to focus on family time instead of kitchen stress. We exchanged gifts around the fireplace, with Derek taking photos to capture moments that felt precious and permanent. Emma hugged him tightly when she opened her gift, a professional easel that she'd mentioned wanting months earlier. Jake's excitement about his new marine biology field kit was infectious, and Derek's pleasure in their happiness seemed completely genuine. That night, after the kids had gone to bed, Derek and I sat by the Christmas tree talking about our future together. He mentioned casually that he'd been looking at larger houses, places where we could all live comfortably with space for Emma's art studio and Jake's growing collection of science equipment.
The conversation felt natural and exciting, like we were finally ready to take the next step in building a life together. January brought what felt like the official beginning of our serious commitment. Derek suggested that I move some of my remaining individual accounts under Patricia's management for better coordination and higher returns. The paperwork seemed extensive, but Derek explained that comprehensive financial planning required thorough documentation. He offered to handle the bureaucratic details while I focused on a particularly demanding client project that required most of my creative energy. The kids were thriving with Derek's continued involvement in their lives. Emma had been accepted to 3 art schools with partial scholarships, and Derek helped her create spreadsheets comparing costs and program benefits. Jake was preparing for state-level marine biology competitions with Derek's encouragement and logistical support. Their academic and creative achievements felt directly connected to Derek's presence in our household, and I felt grateful every day for the stability and support he provided. February brought Derek's suggestion that we formalize our living arrangement by having him move in officially. He argued that we were already functioning as a family unit, and consolidating households would provide better financial efficiency and emotional security for everyone involved. The idea felt like a natural progression rather than a major change, since Derek was already spending most nights at our house and contributing significantly to household expenses. Derek's official move-in process felt seamless and considerate. He integrated his belongings thoughtfully, never overwhelming our spaces or displacing things that belonged to Emma, Jake, or me. His home office equipment upgraded our household technology significantly, and his furniture pieces enhanced rather than dominated our existing decor. When neighbors commented on what a lovely family we made, I felt proud rather than awkward about our unconventional but happy arrangement. March marked 1 full year since Derek and I had met, and he planned a celebration dinner that felt like an anniversary worth commemorating. He recreated our first date at Luminaire, complete with white orchids and thoughtful conversation about how much our lives had improved together. Derek talked about his hopes for our continued future, mentioning specific plans for family vacations, home improvements, and support for the kids' educational goals. The romantic atmosphere of our anniversary dinner made me feel more secure in our relationship than I had ever felt about any romantic partnership. Derek's consistent presence, his genuine care for Emma and Jake, and his practical support for my business had created the kind of stability I dreamed about during the lonely months after my divorce. When he mentioned that Patricia had suggested consolidating more of our financial planning for tax efficiency, it seemed like a logical next step for people building a life together. April brought the conversation that would eventually change everything, though I didn't recognize its significance at the time. Derek mentioned that his current project required significant upfront investment that would tie up his liquid assets for several months. He assured me that his returns would be substantial, but in the meantime, he wondered if I might consider covering some of our shared household expenses using funds from my investment accounts. The request seemed reasonable, given Derek's year of financial contributions to our family. He'd paid for dinners, vacations, gifts, and household improvements without ever asking for reimbursement. His temporary cash flow situation felt like a normal part of business cycles, and I trusted his financial judgment completely. When I agreed to take over more of our shared expenses, Derek's relief and gratitude seemed genuine and touching. May brought increasing requests for financial assistance that Derek framed as temporary inconveniences rather than concerning patterns.
His development project was requiring more capital than anticipated, but the potential returns justified the additional investment. When I expressed concern about depleting my savings, Derek reminded me that my money was working much harder in Patricia's investment accounts than it ever had in traditional banking. Derek's explanations about cash flow and investment timing sounded sophisticated and reassuring. He showed me paperwork documenting his project's progress and projected returns, materials that looked professional and legitimate. When I suggested consulting with an independent financial advisor, Derek seemed hurt that I might doubt his judgment after everything we'd built together. His emotional response made me feel guilty for questioning someone who'd proven his commitment to our family's well-being repeatedly.
June brought Emma's graduation and the associated expenses for senior activities, cap and gown fees, and celebration dinners. When I tried to access my investment accounts to pay for these important milestones, Patricia's office explained that my funds were temporarily locked in a particularly lucrative opportunity that couldn't be interrupted without significant penalties. Derek offered to cover Emma's graduation expenses personally, framing his assistance as investment in our daughter's special moments. Emma's graduation ceremony felt bittersweet because Derek's support allowed us to celebrate properly, but I was beginning to feel uncomfortable about my complete financial dependence on his generosity. When other parents asked about my business and investment success, Derek would answer proudly about my smart financial decisions and growing portfolio value. His confidence in my financial situation seemed absolute, even when I was beginning to have private doubts about account accessibility and investment transparency. July brought the beginning of Emma's summer job at a local art gallery and Jake's enrollment in a marine biology camp that Derek had researched and recommended. Both kids were thriving under Derek's continued guidance and support, but I was starting to notice subtle changes in their behavior around financial discussions. When I mentioned wanting to check my account balances or make independent spending decisions, Emma and Jake would exchange glances that seemed worried or confused. The kids' concern became more apparent during a family dinner in late July when Derek was working late and couldn't join us. Emma asked carefully whether I was happy with how Derek managed our household finances, and Jake wondered why I never seemed to buy things for myself anymore without asking Derek's opinion first. Their questions caught me off guard because I hadn't realized that my financial independence had become so completely intertwined with Derek's judgment and approval. August brought the incident that first made me question Derek's true motives, though I didn't want to acknowledge my growing suspicions. I'd received a check from a major client for a completed project and wanted to deposit it directly into my personal checking account rather than routing it through Patricia's investment management system. When I mentioned this plan to Derek, his reaction seemed disproportionately negative, almost angry. Derek's argument against direct deposits centered on tax implications and missed investment opportunities, but his tone felt controlling rather than advisory. He insisted that all income should flow through Patricia's management for optimal financial planning. And when I suggested that I might want some money immediately accessible for personal spending, Derek accused me of not trusting the financial strategies that had been working so successfully for our family. That night, Derek apologized for his reaction, explaining that he was under tremendous stress from his development project and worried about making sure our family remained financially secure. His vulnerability and concern seemed genuine, and I felt guilty for doubting someone who'd been working so hard to protect our interests. When Derek suggested that we plan a special weekend getaway to reconnect and reduce stress, I agreed, gratefully, hoping to restore harmony to our relationship. Our weekend in Santa Barbara felt like a return to the early magic of our courtship. Derek was attentive, romantic, and genuinely interested in my thoughts about everything, from restaurant choices to hiking trail preferences. He apologized repeatedly for his recent stress and promised to communicate better about financial matters. When he suggested that we consider making our relationship legally official through marriage, I felt a flutter of excitement mixed with unexpected anxiety. Derek's marriage proposal came during sunset on the beach, with a ring that was absolutely perfect for my style and personality. His speech about wanting to build a permanent family with Emma, Jake, and me touched my heart deeply. When I said yes, Derek's joy seemed completely authentic, and I felt hopeful about our future together. The ring was stunning, and Derek's planning had been thoughtful and romantic in ways that Marcus had never achieved. September brought the beginning of wedding planning and the associated financial discussions that would eventually reveal Derek's true intentions. When I wanted to contribute to wedding expenses from my investment accounts, Patricia's office explained that my funds were still tied up in the lucrative opportunity that couldn't be disturbed without losing substantial returns. Derek assured me that he could handle all wedding costs, but I was beginning to feel uncomfortable about my complete financial dependence on his generosity. Derek's control over wedding planning extended beyond financial matters to include guest lists, venue selection, and timeline decisions that felt increasingly like his preferences rather than collaborative choices. When I suggested inviting certain friends or family members, Derek would find practical reasons why smaller gatherings were more intimate and meaningful. His opinions about wedding details seemed to carry more weight than mine, even though he framed his preferences as suggestions rather than demands. October brought the conversation that finally made me acknowledge that something was fundamentally wrong with our relationship dynamic. When I asked Patricia directly about accessing some of my investment funds for independent spending, she seemed uncomfortable and suggested that I discuss financial matters with Derek, since he was listed as the primary contact on most of my accounts. The revelation that Derek had become the primary contact without my explicit memory or understanding felt like a betrayal. Derek's explanation for his access centered on efficiency and protection, claiming that he'd accepted primary contact status to help manage paperwork while I focused on creative work. His reasoning sounded logical, but I couldn't shake the feeling that important decisions had been made without my full understanding or consent.
When I asked to review all account documentation personally, Derek seemed hurt and defensive about my apparent lack of trust. November brought increasing tension between Derek and the kids that I'd been trying to ignore. Emma mentioned that Derek seemed different when I wasn't around, less patient and more critical of their activities and friends. Jake complained that Derek had started monitoring his phone usage and questioning his after-school activities in ways that felt intrusive rather than caring. Their complaints seemed minor individually, but together, they suggested a pattern of controlling behavior that I didn't want to acknowledge. The breaking point came during Thanksgiving week when Emma approached me with genuine fear in her eyes. She'd overheard Derek on the phone discussing liquidating assets and maximizing returns before the timeline expired. When she asked Derek about the conversation, he dismissed her concerns and told her not to worry about adult financial matters. Emma's instincts told her that Derek was planning something that wouldn't benefit our family, and she begged me to investigate our financial situation independently. December brought my first serious attempt to understand my actual financial position without Derek's involvement or interpretation. When I called Patricia's office directly, requesting detailed account statements and transaction histories, I was told that such requests required Derek's authorization since he was the primary account holder. The news that Derek had become the primary account holder, rather than just a contact person, felt like discovering that I'd been living in someone else's life without realizing it. Derek's reaction to my independent investigation attempts was immediate and intense. He accused me of paranoia and ingratitude, reminding me of all the ways he'd supported our family financially and emotionally. His arguments about trust and partnership sounded reasonable on the surface, but his refusal to provide transparent access to my own money felt increasingly controlling and suspicious. When I insisted on meeting with Patricia without Derek's involvement, he became genuinely angry for the first time in our relationship. That night, Derek's mask finally slipped completely during what would become our final argument as a couple. He told me that I was being ungrateful and paranoid, that he'd rescued me from financial mediocrity and given Emma and Jake opportunities they never would have had without his guidance. His words revealed a man who saw himself as my savior rather than my partner, someone who expected gratitude and submission in exchange for his assistance. Derek's true nature emerged fully when he explained that my suspicious behavior was forcing him to accelerate his timeline for protecting our family's assets. He admitted that he'd been moving my money into investments that would benefit him directly, claiming that my inability to understand complex financial strategies made his control necessary and justified. When I demanded immediate access to my funds, Derek laughed and told me that my money had been working to support his development projects all along. The revelation that Derek had been stealing from me while posing as my protector felt like discovering that our entire relationship had been an elaborate con game. His confession that he'd targeted me specifically because single mothers with successful businesses made ideal marks for long-term financial manipulation destroyed every memory we'd created together. When I threatened to call the police, Derek reminded me that all the documentation showed I'd authorized every transaction willingly. That's when Emma stepped forward with the words that changed everything and revealed that my children had been protecting me in ways I never imagined possible. Emma stepped forward from the doorway where she'd been listening to Derek's confession, her phone held steady in her trembling hands. "I recorded everything you just said," she announced, her voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. Every single word about stealing Mom's money and targeting single mothers. Jake appeared beside his sister, his face pale but determined. "We've been recording you for months, Derek. All the phone calls, all the conversations with Patricia,
everything." Derek's confident expression crumbled as he stared at my children, realizing that his carefully constructed facade had been completely exposed by two teenagers who'd seen through his manipulation long before I had. The man I thought I loved, the person I trusted with my heart and my future, stood before me revealed as a calculating predator who'd systematically destroyed my financial independence while pretending to build our family's security. "You can't use those recordings," Derek said, his voice losing the smooth confidence that had charmed me for nearly 2 years. "They're illegal. You recorded private conversations without consent." Emma lifted her chin with the kind of courage I wished I'd possessed months earlier. "Actually, we researched the law. California is a two-party consent state, but there are exceptions when recording someone committing a crime. Fraud is a felony." The transformation in Derek was immediate and terrifying. Gone was any pretense of the caring, supportive partner who'd integrated himself so seamlessly into our lives. The man standing in my living room was a stranger, cold and calculating, his eyes moving between my children and me as if assessing potential threats to his operation. "Those kids of yours have been trouble from the beginning," he said, his voice carrying a menace that made me step protectively in front of Emma and Jake.
"What did you just say about my children?" The protective fury that rose in my chest felt like pure fire. Derek had crossed the line from stealing my money to threatening the people I'd die to protect. "They're the only reason I'm not completely destroyed by what you've done to me." Derek's laugh was ugly and bitter. "Those little spies have been sabotaging me for months. Every time I tried to accelerate the timeline, they'd interfere somehow. Emma asking questions about account statements, Jake pretending to need help with homework while actually listening to my phone calls." I turned to look at my children, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time in months. Emma's artistic sensitivity hadn't been making her paranoid about Derek's presence in our home. Her instincts had been warning her that something was fundamentally wrong with a man who seemed too perfect, too interested in our family's private business. Jake's increasing questions about Derek's background and business dealings hadn't been typical teenage curiosity. My scientifically minded son had been conducting an investigation, gathering evidence of inconsistencies in Derek's stories and behavior patterns. "How long have you known?" I asked them, my voice barely above a whisper. Emma and Jake exchanged a glance that spoke of months of secret collaboration and shared worry. "Since October," Emma admitted. "When Derek started answering your phone and making appointments without asking you first, that felt wrong. Like he was taking over your business the same way he'd taken over everything else." Jake nodded, his young face serious with responsibility that no 14-year-old should have to carry. I started paying attention to his stories about work projects. The details never matched up when he talked about the same developments on different days. Marine biology taught me to notice patterns and inconsistencies. Derek's stories had both. The revelation that my children had been protecting me while I'd been completely blind to Derek's manipulation felt like discovering that I'd been sleepwalking through my own life. They'd recognized the danger signs I'd missed, the subtle controls I'd interpreted as caring attention, the financial isolation I'd mistaken for sophisticated investment strategy. "Show me the recordings," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Emma pulled up her phone's recording app, revealing dozens of files dated over the past several months. The earliest recording was from early October, just days after I'd first expressed concern about accessing my investment accounts. The most recent was from that morning, when Derek made a phone call in our kitchen while thinking Emma and Jake had already left for school. Derek made a desperate lunge toward Emma's phone, but Jake stepped between them with surprising physical presence for a teenager who'd always preferred books to sports. "Don't even think about touching my sister," Jake said, his voice carrying the same protective fury I felt burning in my chest. "We've already uploaded everything to cloud storage and sent copies to Mom's email. Destroying Emma's phone won't help you now." The strategic thinking my children had demonstrated while gathering evidence against Derek impressed me even as it broke my heart that they'd felt the need to protect me from my own romantic choices. They'd been living with the knowledge that their mother was being systematically victimized,
watching helplessly as I made decisions that gave Derek increasing control over our family's security and future. "Play the recording from last Tuesday," Jake suggested, his voice steady despite the obvious stress of confronting an adult who just revealed himself to be dangerous. "The one where Derek talks to Patricia about liquidating Mom's accounts before Christmas." Emma scrolled through her files and selected a recording labeled with that date. Derek's voice filled the room, clear and damning in its casual discussion of my money as if it belonged to him. "Patricia, we need to move faster on the Chen accounts. I want everything transferred to the Cayman Holdings by December 15th. If Sarah starts asking more questions, I'll need to have everything locked down where she can't access it without going through international banking procedures." Patricia's voice responded with professional coolness that chilled me to the bone. "Derek, are you sure about this timeline?"
If she involves outside attorneys or accountants, this becomes much more complicated. Derek's recorded voice continued with casual confidence that demonstrated how completely he'd planned my financial destruction. "Sarah won't involve outside help. She trusts me completely, and her kids can't prove anything without access to the actual account documents. By the time she realizes what's happened, I'll be in Costa Rica with enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life." The room fell silent except for the sound of my own ragged breathing as Derek's true intentions became undeniably clear. He hadn't just been stealing my money, he'd been planning to disappear entirely, leaving me financially ruined with no legal recourse and no way to recover what he'd taken. The man I'd planned to marry, the person I'd trusted with my children's futures, had been methodically preparing to abandon us in devastating poverty. "There's more," Emma said quietly, her finger hovering over another recording file. "This one is from 3 weeks ago, when Derek thought we were both at school but I'd come home sick." She pressed play, and Derek's voice filled the room again, this time speaking to someone I didn't recognize about expanding his operation to target other single mothers in neighboring communities. "The Chen job is almost complete, and I've identified 3 other potential marks in the area. Single mothers with successful small businesses are perfect because they're isolated, financially naive, and desperate for male support. The key is integration into family life before financial manipulation. Kids make them vulnerable because they'll do anything to provide stability for their children." My legs gave out, and I sank onto the couch as the full scope of Derek's predatory behavior became clear. I hadn't just been his girlfriend or his fiancée, I'd been his mark, chosen specifically for characteristics that made me vulnerable to his particular type of fraud. Every moment of our relationship had been calculated manipulation designed to separate me from my money while keeping me emotionally dependent on his approval and presence. Derek must have realized that his situation had become completely untenable because his demeanor shifted again, this time toward desperate negotiation rather than angry threats. "Sarah, listen to me. Yes, I moved some of your money around, but it was all legitimate investment activity. Those recordings are taken out of context. I can explain everything if you'll just give me a chance to show you the paperwork." "What paperwork?" Emma demanded, her artistic intuition cutting through Derek's attempted manipulation with surgical precision. "The fake documents you created to make Mom think her money was being invested, or the real documents showing how you transferred everything to your personal accounts?" Derek's face flushed with anger at being challenged by someone he'd consistently underestimated. "You little brat, you have no idea what you're talking about." Jake stepped forward again, his scientific training evident in his methodical approach to presenting evidence. "Actually, I do know what I'm talking about. I called Patricia's office last week, pretending to be working on a school project about financial planning. I asked general questions about investment accounts and withdrawal procedures. Patricia let slip that Mom's accounts had been closed, and the funds had been transferred to international holdings last month. The revelation that my investment accounts had been completely emptied hit me like physical violence. I'd been living in Derek's house of lies, trusting his explanations about temporary fund restrictions while he systematically stole every dollar I'd saved for Emma's college education and Jake's future opportunities.
The money I'd earned through years of careful business building and responsible planning was gone, transferred to offshore accounts where I'd never be able to recover it. "How much?" I whispered, dreading the answer but needing to know the full extent of Derek's theft. Jake consulted a small notebook where he'd apparently been tracking financial information with scientific precision. Based on what Patricia told me and what I overheard Derek saying on phone calls, approximately $430,000 from your investment accounts, plus another $60,000 from your business checking account that Derek has been accessing. Nearly $500,000. My entire financial foundation, wiped out by someone I trusted with my heart and my future.
The college fund I'd been building for Emma since she was born, the retirement savings that would have provided security for my later years, the emergency fund that protected us from financial disaster. All of it gone, stolen by a man who'd manipulated my desire for love and stability into complete vulnerability. Derek's response to Jake's precise accounting was immediate rage directed at my children rather than remorse for his actions. "You think you're so smart, you little freaks? You have no idea what you've cost me. This operation took 2 years to set up, and you've ruined everything with your constant spying and interference." The mask was completely off now, revealing Derek's true feelings about Emma and Jake. They'd never been potential stepchildren he cared about. They'd been obstacles to his theft, inconvenient complications in his plan to destroy my financial independence. "Good," Emma said firmly, her voice carrying the strength I'd been lacking throughout this entire ordeal. "I'm glad we ruined your operation. I'm glad we protected Mom from giving you even more than you've already stolen." Derek took a threatening step toward Emma, but I finally found my voice and my courage. "Don't you dare move another inch toward my children. You've taken my money, but you will not intimidate or threaten the people I love most in this world." Standing up on unsteady legs, I felt something shift inside me as maternal protection overrode romantic devastation. Derek had systematically destroyed my financial security while pretending to love me, but my children had risked his anger and potential retaliation to gather evidence that could bring him to justice. They'd been braver and smarter than I had been, protecting their mother when she'd been too blind to protect herself. "Emma, Jake, I need you to go to your rooms and call your Aunt Michelle. Tell her what's happening and ask her to come over immediately with Uncle David. I want witnesses here who aren't emotionally involved in this situation." My children hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave me alone with Derek, but they recognized the authority in my voice and headed toward the stairs. "And kids," I called after them, my voice stronger than it had been in months. "Thank you for being braver and smarter than your mother. Thank you for protecting our family when I couldn't see what needed protecting." Emma turned back with tears in her eyes. "We love you, Mom. That's why we couldn't let him keep hurting you." After Emma and Jake disappeared upstairs, I faced Derek alone in the living room that had witnessed so many moments I'd mistaken for genuine family happiness. The Christmas tree we decorated together stood in the corner, its lights twinkling cheerfully in grotesque contrast to the devastation of my life that Derek's confession had revealed. Every shared meal, every family game night, every moment of what I thought was growing love had been nothing but manipulation designed to lower my guard and facilitate his theft. "Sarah, you're making a terrible mistake," Derek said, his voice shifting back toward the smooth persuasion that had charmed me for nearly 2 years. "Those kids have poisoned your mind against me. Everything I did was to protect your financial future, to make sure you and the children would be taken care of properly." Even now, with his crimes exposed and his true nature revealed, Derek was still trying to manipulate me into believing that his theft had somehow been for my benefit. "Protect me by stealing almost $500,000? I laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "Protect me by planning to disappear to Costa Rica with money I'd saved from my children's futures?" Derek's expression shifted to something calculating and cold. "You can't prove any of that.
Those recordings were made illegally, and any decent lawyer will get them thrown out of court. It's your word against mine, and I have all the documentation showing that you authorized every transaction. The confidence in Derek's voice suggested that he'd planned for this possibility, that he'd been careful to create legal cover for his theft while he'd been emotionally manipulating me into compliance. He'd probably researched the law as thoroughly as he'd researched my financial vulnerability, ensuring that his crimes would be difficult to prosecute even if they were discovered. Maybe you're right about the legal technicalities, I admitted, watching Derek's face light up with premature victory.
But you made one crucial mistake in your planning. Derek's confident expression faltered slightly as he tried to calculate what advantage I might still possess. What mistake? You assumed that someone desperate for love and stability would remain desperate even after discovering that the love was fake and the stability was built on lies. I picked up my phone and dialed 911, keeping my eyes on Derek's face as it registered the reality that his manipulation no longer had any power over me. Yes, I need to report a financial crime in progress. Someone has fraudulently accessed my bank accounts and stolen approximately $500,000. Derek lunged toward me as I spoke to the emergency dispatcher, but the front door opened at exactly the right moment to admit Michelle and David, who took one look at the situation and moved protectively between Derek and me. "Sarah, are you hurt?" Michelle demanded, her voice carrying the fierce protectiveness of someone who'd watched me rebuild my life after one devastating relationship, only to fall victim to an even more destructive one. "I'm not hurt physically," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "but Derek has been systematically stealing my money for months while pretending to be my partner and stepfather to my children." Derek, who'd never particularly liked Derek despite his polite tolerance during family gatherings, stepped closer to the man who'd been living in my house and planning my financial destruction. "The police are on their way," I continued, addressing Derek directly. "You can leave voluntarily now, or you can wait for them to arrest you here. Either way, this is over." Derek's response was immediate and predictable, a final attempt to shift blame and avoid responsibility for his calculated crimes. "Sarah, you're hysterical. You're letting your children's paranoia destroy the best thing that ever happened to your family." Even in his desperation, Derek was still trying to use my children as weapons against me, still trying to convince me that their protection and wisdom were somehow harmful to my well-being. The irony was staggering. The person who'd been systematically destroying my family's security was accusing Emma and Jake of being the real threat to our happiness and stability. "The best thing that ever happened to my family," I repeated slowly, "was raising children smart enough and brave enough to see through your lies when I was too foolish to recognize them myself. Emma and Jake saved me from complete financial ruin, probably saved me from emotional destruction that would have taken years to recover from. They're heroes, Derek. You're a thief." The sound of police sirens growing closer seemed to break through Derek's remaining delusions about talking his way out of consequences for his actions. He glanced toward the door, then back at me, his expression cycling through anger, fear, and a last desperate attempt at the charm that had worked so effectively for so long. "Sarah, please, I love you. Everything I did was because I love you and wanted to take care of you." "No," I said firmly, surprised by the strength in my own voice. "You don't love me. You don't even know me. You love the idea of controlling me, of making me financially dependent so I'd never be strong enough to leave you. That's not love, Derek. That's predatory behavior, and I won't let you convince me otherwise." When the police arrived, Emma and Jake came downstairs to provide their recordings and testimony with the kind of composed maturity that made me proud and heartbroken simultaneously. They'd spent months carrying the burden of knowledge about Derek's crimes, protecting me from complete financial devastation while watching me make romantic decisions that put our entire family at risk. Detective Maria Rodriguez listened to Emma's recordings with professional attention that gave me hope for actual justice.
"These recordings clearly document financial fraud and conspiracy," she said, looking directly at Derek. "Mr. Castellano, you're under arrest for theft, fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes." As Derek was led away in handcuffs, still protesting his innocence and claiming that everything had been a misunderstanding, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: relief. The immediate crisis was over, but the damage Derek had inflicted on my family's financial security would take years to repair. My retirement savings were gone, Emma's college fund had been stolen, and my business accounts had been emptied by someone I trusted with my heart and my future.
The man I'd planned to marry had left us in financial ruin while planning to disappear to another country with the money I'd worked decades to save. But as I watched my children comfort each other after the police left, I realized that Derek's most significant failure had been underestimating the strength and intelligence of Emma and Jake. They'd recognized his predatory behavior, gathered evidence of his crimes, and protected their mother when she'd been too emotionally compromised to protect herself. Their courage and wisdom had prevented complete disaster and provided the evidence necessary for Derek's prosecution. That night, after Michelle and David had helped me secure my house and change the locks Derek might have copied, I sat with Emma and Jake in our kitchen to have the conversation that should have happened months earlier. "I owe you both an enormous apology," I began, my voice thick with gratitude and regret. "You tried to warn me about Derek, and I didn't listen because I was so desperate to believe that someone could love me and want to be part of our family." Emma reached across the table to take my hand, her artistic sensitivity evident in her gentle response. "Mom, we understand why you wanted to believe in Derek. After Dad left, you deserve to have someone who really loves you and appreciates how amazing you are. Derek just wasn't that person." Jake nodded, his scientific mind already focused on practical solutions rather than emotional processing. "The important thing is that we caught him before he could steal everything. We still have your business, we still have our house, and we still have each other." The resilience my children displayed in the face of Derek's betrayal reminded me that we'd been strong before he arrived in our lives, and we'd be strong again after dealing with the consequences of his theft. Emma and Jake had learned valuable lessons about recognizing manipulation and protecting the people they loved. I'd learned equally valuable lessons about trusting my children's instincts and not letting romantic desperation compromise my judgment. As we sat together in our kitchen, planning how to rebuild what Derek had destroyed, I felt grateful for the first time in months. Not grateful for the financial devastation or the emotional betrayal, but grateful for children who'd been willing to risk a predator's anger to protect their mother from complete destruction. Derek had stolen my money, but he'd failed to steal what mattered most: my family's love, strength, and unbreakable bond. 6 months after Derek's arrest, I sat in the district attorney's office listening to prosecutor Amanda Chen explain the charges that would finally bring justice for what he'd done to my family. "We've recovered approximately $280,000 from Derek's offshore accounts," she said, sliding a stack of documents across her desk. "The international banking investigation is ongoing, but we're confident we'll recover most of your stolen funds over the next year." The relief of knowing that Emma's college education and our family's financial future weren't completely destroyed felt overwhelming after months of uncertainty about whether we'd ever see any of our money again. Derek had pleaded guilty to multiple felony charges, including grand theft, financial fraud, and identity theft, in exchange for cooperation with authorities investigating his broader criminal network. His admission that he'd targeted at least 7 other single mothers across California had led to additional arrests and recoveries. Derek's cooperation has been extensive, Amanda continued, her professional demeanor softening slightly as she addressed the personal impact of his crimes on my family. He's provided information about other criminals using similar tactics, which has helped us prevent additional victims from losing their savings to romance fraud schemes. The knowledge that Derek's prosecution might protect other families from experiencing what we'd endured gave meaning to the months of legal proceedings and emotional recovery.
Emma had started her freshman year at California College of Arts with a partial scholarship and the recovered funds that made her dream education possible. Watching her carry her art supplies across campus for the first time, her face bright with excitement about advanced painting techniques and sculpture workshops, reminded me that Derek's attempt to steal her future had ultimately failed. Her courage in recording his conversations had not only saved our family, but had also demonstrated the kind of moral strength that would serve her well as an artist and as a person. Jake had thrown himself into marine biology studies with renewed passion after Derek's arrest, as if exposing a predator's lies had reinforced his commitment to scientific truth and environmental protection. His entry in the state science fair focused on microplastic pollution in coastal waters, research that earned him recognition from several universities already interested in his eventual college applications. The confidence he'd gained from helping catch Derek had transformed him from a quiet, studious kid into someone who understood his own capability to make a difference in the world. My interior design business had recovered more quickly than I'd expected after Derek's financial manipulation had been exposed and reversed. Several clients who'd worked with me during Derek's involvement specifically requested continued services after learning that I'd been the victim of fraud rather than someone who'd made poor business decisions. The reputation I'd built over years of reliable work and creative solutions had survived Derek's attempt to use my business connections for his own criminal purposes. Marcus, my ex-husband, had surprised me by offering genuine support during the legal proceedings against Derek. Despite our difficult divorce and years of minimal communication, he'd stepped up to provide additional emotional support for Emma and Jake while I dealt with the stress of criminal investigations and asset recovery. His willingness to put aside our personal history for our children's well-being reminded me that people could change and grow, even when romantic relationships didn't survive. The therapy sessions I'd started after Derek's arrest had helped me process the shame and self-doubt that came with realizing how completely I'd been manipulated by someone I'd trusted with my heart and my future. Dr. Jennifer Walsh specialized in helping victims of financial abuse understand that their desire for love and partnership had been exploited by skilled criminals who targeted specific vulnerabilities.
Emma and Jake had also benefited from family counseling sessions that helped us rebuild trust and communication after months of secrets and protective lies. They'd been carrying the burden of knowing Derek was dangerous while watching their mother fall deeper under his influence, a responsibility that no teenagers should have to bear alone. Processing those experiences together had strengthened our family bond and improved our ability to discuss difficult situations openly rather than trying to protect each other through silence. The house felt different after Derek's belongings were removed and his presence was erased from spaces where he'd seemed so comfortable for nearly 2 years. Emma had redecorated the living room with bold colors and artistic touches that reflected our family's personality rather than Derek's conservative preferences. Jake had reclaimed the home office space where Derek had conducted his fraudulent phone calls, transforming it into a study area filled with marine biology reference books and scientific equipment. Dating remained completely off my radar as I focused on rebuilding the financial security Derek had destroyed and processing the emotional trauma of discovering that someone I'd loved had been systematically stealing from my family. The idea of trusting another romantic partner with access to my personal life felt impossible, at least for the foreseeable future. Emma and Jake had made it clear that they supported whatever decisions I made about relationships, but they also appreciated having their mother's complete attention focused on family recovery rather than romantic pursuits. The civil lawsuit against Patricia, Derek's accomplice in the investment fraud scheme, had resulted in additional financial recovery and her permanent loss of professional licensing. Her cooperation with Derek's theft had cost her career and reputation, consequences that felt proportionate to her role in nearly destroying my family's financial future. The revelation that she'd helped Derek target multiple victims had led to criminal charges that would likely result in prison time for her active participation in organized fraud. Community response to Derek's crimes had been overwhelmingly supportive once the full scope of his predatory behavior became public knowledge. Several local business owners had reached out to offer professional services at reduced rates while I rebuilt my financial foundation. The network of support from people who understood that I'd been victimized rather than complicit had helped counteract the shame and isolation that financial abuse victims often experience.
Emma's art had evolved significantly since Derek's arrest, with her recent paintings exploring themes of hidden truth and protective relationships. One piece that particularly moved me showed a young woman shielding an older woman from shadowy figures, the composition clearly inspired by her own experience protecting me from Derek's manipulation. Her artistic processing of our family's trauma had been both healing and empowering, transforming victimization into creative expression that might help other people recognize similar situations. Jake's scientific approach to understanding Derek's criminal behavior had led him to research romance fraud patterns and prevention strategies with the same methodical attention he applied to marine ecosystem studies. His presentation to our local senior center about financial predators targeting older adults had been so well received that he'd been invited to speak at additional community organizations. His experience catching Derek had shown him that scientific thinking and careful observation could be applied to protecting people as well as studying ocean life. The recovered funds had allowed me to establish new financial safeguards that would prevent anyone from gaining the kind of access Derek had used to steal from our family. Multiple account verification systems, independent financial advisors with proper credentials, and clear boundaries around romantic partners' involvement in business decisions would protect us from similar manipulation in the future. The lessons we'd learned had been expensive, but they'd also been comprehensive enough to prevent repeat victimization. Derek's sentencing hearing had provided closure that I hadn't expected to need. Watching him accept responsibility for his crimes and express what seemed like genuine remorse for the damage he had inflicted on multiple families had helped me separate the person I'd thought I loved from the criminal who'd stolen from us. The judge's sentence of 8 years in prison with restitution requirements had felt proportionate to the calculated nature of his crimes and their impact on his victims' lives. The victim impact statement Emma had insisted on reading at Derek's sentencing had been one of the most powerful moments in our family's recovery process. Her articulate description of watching her mother be systematically manipulated while feeling helpless to intervene had moved everyone in the courtroom, including Derek himself. Her courage in speaking publicly about our experience had helped other victims find their own voices and had demonstrated that teenagers could be powerful advocates for justice. As I looked around our kitchen table during Sunday dinner, watching Emma and Jake discuss their academic projects and future plans with the confidence that comes from overcoming serious challenges, I felt grateful for the strength our family had discovered during the worst period of our lives. Derek had intended to destroy our financial security and emotional stability, but instead his crimes had revealed the depth of love and protection we felt for each other. The warning Emma and Jake had given me about Derek using me had been absolutely correct, though none of us had initially understood the full scope of his criminal intentions. They'd recognized that something was fundamentally wrong with Derek's presence in our family before I'd been willing to acknowledge the red flags that seemed obvious in retrospect. Their instincts had been sharper than my judgment, and their courage had been stronger than my hope for romantic happiness. 6 months of recovery had taught me that single motherhood wasn't a weakness to be fixed by finding a male partner, but rather a source of strength that had enabled me to raise children wise enough to protect their family from predators. Emma and Jake had proven that love isn't always romantic, partnership doesn't require romance, and the most important relationships in life are often the ones we're born into rather than the ones we choose as adults. Derek's attempt to use me had ultimately failed because he underestimated the intelligence and courage of 2 teenagers who loved their mother enough to risk everything to save her from his manipulation. Their warning had been the beginning of his downfall, and their evidence had been the foundation of his prosecution. In trying to destroy our family, Derek had actually made us stronger, smarter, and more united than we'd ever been before. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.